My parents love only my sister, the golden child. When she owed dangerous people $85,000, they said I was obliged to help her. When I refused, they tried to steal the money. My name is Jake. I'm 35 now, but I think about my childhood more often than I'd like to admit. I grew up in a small town in a modest house, the kind with squeaky floors and walls too thin to keep secrets. My parents, Robert and Linda, were what you'd call traditional. Dad worked a regular 9 to 5 at a local hardware store, while Mom stayed home to take care of the house. Sounds idyllic, right? Well, not if you lived it. I had a younger sister, Melanie, 7 years younger. On the surface, she was perfect. Blonde curls, dimples, and a smile that melted grown-ups. To my parents, she was an angel. To me, she was chaos wrapped in pink bows. From as far back as I can remember, my life was about responsibility. I was the one cleaning the yard, taking out the trash, and walking to the store in winter storms because you're the older one, Jake. My chores started when I was maybe 6, and they only piled up as I got older. Meanwhile, Melanie could do no wrong. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. She broke Mom's favorite vase once while running through the living room, but instead of being scolded, Dad said, "She's just a kid, Jake. Why didn't you stop her?" Somehow, it was always my fault. By the time I was 10, I understood the game. My parents had 2 sets of rules, one for me and one for Melanie. I had to wash dishes and get good grades, while Melanie, by some miracle, was too little to help. Every time I'd complain, I'd hear the same thing. "Be a good big brother, Jake. She looks up to you." She didn't look up to me. She tormented me. Melanie was the kind of kid who knew exactly how to cry on cue. I'd be building something with my Legos and she'd stomp in, knock them over, then run to Mom screaming, "Jake pushed me." Before I could defend myself, Dad's belt would be snapping against the table, and I'd know I was in for it. And it didn't stop there. There was this one incident when I was 12. I had been saving up for weeks to buy a new baseball glove. My parents gave me no allowance, so I earned money by shoveling driveways in the winter and mowing lawns in the summer. I kept my savings in an old tin can under my bed. One day, Melanie walked into my room while I was at a friend's house and borrowed my money, all of it, to buy herself a doll. When I found out, I was furious. I confronted her in front of my parents. She looked at me with those big, crocodile eyes and said, "I thought he was saving it for me," and they believed her. "You don't need to be so selfish, Jake," Mom said. "She's your sister." "She's a kid, Jake," Dad added. "Don't be so hard on her." Melanie didn't even apologize. She just smiled like she'd won. That's when I realized no one was ever going to defend me. School wasn't much better. By the time I was in high school, I developed a habit of keeping to myself. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't a total outcast either, just a kid who blended into the walls. Teachers liked me because I was quiet and did my homework, but at home, my grades were never good enough for my parents. "If you spent less time being lazy, you'd get straight A's like your cousin James," Dad would say. I worked harder, hoping they'd notice. They didn't. Melanie, meanwhile, became the darling of the family. She was funny, charming, and manipulative in a way only I seemed to notice. She'd cry to Mom when I didn't let her win at board games. She'd tattle when I ignored her. Once, she lied to my parents that I'd hit her. I was grounded for 2 weeks, and Dad gave me a lecture about how men don't hit girls. I didn't even touch her. It felt like I was living in someone else's shadow, someone who wasn't even trying. Then came the night everything boiled over. I was 17. Melanie was 10. Mom and Dad went out for their anniversary dinner, leaving me to watch her. I told Melanie not to go into my room. I don't even know why I bothered saying it. She always went into my room. I locked the door this time. An hour later, she started screaming. Loud. It was blood-curdling. I ran out of my room to find her sitting on the floor of the kitchen, tears pouring down her face. Broken glass surrounded her. One of Mom's crystal plates was shattered at her feet. "What did you do?" I asked, panicked. She looked up at me, those fake tears in full force, and whispered, "I wanted to set the table for you." Before I could ask more, Mom and Dad came bursting through the front door, having come home early. I tried to explain, but Melanie's sobbing drowned me out. You let her play with glass? Mom screamed. I didn't let her. I didn't even know. Jake, get to your room. Dad's voice was thunderous. I sat on my bed, shaking, while Melanie got all the hugs and comfort. They didn't even care that I was scared too, scared of how much my parents trusted her lies. As I got older, I started distancing myself. When I left for college, I thought I'd finally escaped the double standards. But phone calls home were filled with updates about Melanie. Your sister got a part in the school play. Melanie's friends love coming over. She's so popular. Meanwhile, I was balancing a job, classes, and crippling student loans. My parents never asked about me, never sent care packages, never even visited. They expected me to be fine. Melanie got a car for her 16th birthday. I bought my first car at 25 with years of savings. When I pointed this out once during a holiday dinner, Dad said, "Life's not fair, Jake. Get used to it." At 35, I've realized this. My parents never saw me as a person. I was a tool, someone to shoulder their expectations. Melanie was their golden child, their pride and joy. And even now, nothing's changed. She's 28, still living at home, working a part-time job because it's hard to find something she likes. Mom cooks for her, Dad pays her phone bill, and I just exist somewhere in the background. The last time I visited home, something strange happened. It was Melanie's birthday, and I reluctantly drove the 2 hours to attend her party. When I walked through the door, Melanie was surrounded by friends, balloons, and a massive cake. My parents hugged me, but it was the kind of hug you give an acquaintance. "Jake, I didn't think you'd come," Melanie said with a smile. Before I could respond, she leaned closer and whispered, "Did you bring a gift, or are you still cheap?" I froze. My parents didn't hear her, of course. I handed her a card with cash and walked to the kitchen to get a drink. I couldn't look at her smug face any longer. That night, I left early. I haven't spoken to Melanie since. Now, sitting here at 35, I'm still untangling my childhood. The double standards shaped me. I struggle with boundaries, with trust, and with believing I'm good enough. I don't hate Melanie. I envy her. I envy how easy life has been for her, how she's never had to fight for respect. And my parents? I don't know if they'll ever understand how much damage they caused. Maybe they never will. I was halfway through my Saturday morning coffee when my phone rang. It was early, too early for casual calls, and when I saw Mom's name, Carol, flash on the screen, I already had a bad feeling. Mom never called unless she needed something. I debated not answering, but curiosity and guilt won out. I swiped to pick up. "Hey, Mom." "Jake." Her voice was tight, breathless. "Thank God you answered. I need to talk to you. It's important." "Okay." I set my mug down, bracing myself. "What's going on?" "It's Melanie," she said quickly, her voice wobbling in that over-exaggerated way I'd heard too many times before. "She's in trouble. She's made some mistakes, and we just don't know what to do." There it was. The second weeb dropped, and I knew it wasn't just about Melanie's trouble. It was about me. I said nothing, letting her fill the silence. "She owes money, Jake," Mom said finally, a shaky breath punctuating the words. $85,000. To the wrong people. Very wrong people. I blinked. 85,000? Yes. Mom practically shouted it, as if repeating the number louder would make it smaller. "They've been calling her non-stop. She's terrified. Your father and I are terrified. We don't know what to do." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? $85,000 was not a mistake. It was a calculated catastrophe. "Jake?" Mom pressed. "Are you hearing me?" "I'm hearing you," I said evenly. "How exactly does someone like Melanie rack up $85,000 of debt to dangerous people?" "Jake, she got in over her head, okay? It doesn't matter now how it happened. What matters is that she's in danger." "She's always in danger, Mom," I replied coldly. "Somehow, she's always the victim, and I'm always the one you call to fix it." "Don't start that," Mom snapped. "This isn't about the past. This is about now. She could get hurt, Jake. These people are serious. They said they'd." Her voice broke, and I could hear her sniffling dramatically. I rolled my eyes, even though she couldn't see it. They said they'd what? I asked, biting the inside of my cheek. They said they'd hurt her, she whispered. Or worse, they want their money. They don't care how they get it. I didn't doubt for a second that Melanie owed people money. She'd always been reckless with finances. But $85,000? What the hell had she been doing? Gambling? Drugs? I didn't even want to know. You want me to help her financially, don't you? I said flatly. Jake, please. Mom's voice took on that familiar pleading tone that used to work on me when I was a kid. You're her brother. Family helps family. You have savings, don't you? You can help her. I laughed bitterly. Family helps family? That's funny, Mom. Because the only time I hear from this family is when you need something. Jake, she gasped like I'd slapped her. How can you say that? Because it's true, I snapped. Where was Melanie when I was working 2 jobs to pay for college? Where were you when I asked for help with my first apartment? Nowhere. But you always come running to me when she screws up. She's your sister, Jake. Mom said firmly, her voice rising. You're supposed to care about her. You're supposed to protect her. No, Mom. I'm not supposed to do anything. Jake, please, she said again, quieter this time, her voice breaking. You don't understand. She's terrified. I'm terrified. I'm begging you. If you don't help her, she could die. These people are serious. She always finds someone to bail her out, I said coldly. This time, it's not going to be me. Jake, Mom cried. How can you be so heartless? So indifferent to your own family? Your own sister? Indifferent. That word hit me harder than it should have. My entire life, I'd been anything but indifferent to my family. I'd been the one who cared, who did everything they ever asked of me. And for what? To be the bad son now because I finally said no? I took a deep breath. I'm not helping her, Mom. Not this time. There was a long pause on the other end. You're going to regret this, she said finally, her voice cold. One day, when something terrible happens, you'll regret not helping her. Maybe, I said, but not as much as I'd regret letting you manipulate me again. I hung up. The rest of that day felt surreal. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Texts from Mom, voicemails from Dad, even a couple of messages from Melanie herself. Melanie's first message, Jake, please, I'm begging you. I'm scared. You're the only one who can help me. I didn't respond. The second, what's wrong with you? I'm your sister. Are you really going to let me suffer? Still no response. By the third message, the gloves were off. You're a selfish bastard, Jake. Mom and Dad are right about you. You don't care about anyone but yourself. I deleted it without reading the rest. That evening, my friend Kyle came over with a 6-pack. I texted him earlier, saying I needed a distraction. Kyle was one of the few people I trusted. Straightforward, no nonsense, and someone who'd been through his own share of family drama. What's going on, man? He asked, dropping onto my couch and cracking open a beer. Family drama, I said, rubbing my temples. Melanie's in trouble again. Mom called me this morning, begging me to bail her out. Kyle raised an eyebrow. What kind of trouble? She owes 85 grand to some dangerous people. Kyle whistled. That's not pocket change. What did she do? Gambling? Drugs? I shrugged. I didn't ask. Honestly, I don't care. Kyle took a sip of his beer, studying me. You told them no, didn't you? Yeah. And now I'm the bad guy. Mom called me indifferent. Melanie called me a selfish bastard. Typical, Kyle muttered. You're not selfish, man. They're just used to you being their safety net. You did the right thing. Doesn't feel like it, I admitted. Of course it doesn't. They're good at guilt-tripping you. That's what they do. But you're not responsible for her mistakes, Jake. She's a grown-ass adult. I nodded, but it didn't make me feel any better. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the phone call in my head. The words, she could die, echoed over and over. As much as I hated to admit it, the thought of Melanie being genuinely hurt, or worse, made my stomach turn. But then I'd think about all the times she'd lied, manipulated, and dragged me through her mess. She'd stolen from me, blamed me, and gotten me punished for things I didn't do. She wasn't innocent. She never had been. Still, I felt sick. 2 days later, the calls stopped. That's when I started to worry. Mom and Dad were persistent people. They didn't just give up. I wondered if something had happened, but I pushed the thought away. If it was really bad, someone would have told me, wouldn't they? I was at work when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but instinct told me to pick up. Hello? There was a pause, and then a low, unfamiliar voice said, "Is this Jake Parker?" I froze. "Who's asking?" "You don't know me, but I know your sister," the man said. "She's in trouble. She mentioned you might be able to help." My blood went cold. "I don't know who you are or what you want," I said carefully, my hand gripping the edge of my desk. "Your sister owes us a lot of money," the man said calmly, "and we're not patient people. If you care about her, you'll pay up. Fast." "She's a grown woman," I snapped. "Her debt isn't my problem." The man chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "Maybe not. But if you don't help her, it's going to become her very big problem." The silence after that threatening phone call lasted a day. 1. That's how long I had to pretend my life was normal. I went to work, came home, and tried to convince myself it wasn't my problem. Melanie was on her own this time. Then the messages started. The text from my mom came first. "Jake, I can't believe you're being so cruel. Melanie is in real danger, and you just sit there, doing nothing. What happened to you? You used to care about family." I didn't respond. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. A few minutes later, "Your sister says you're doing fine financially, that you've got savings. Is this really so much to ask? It's $85,000, Jake." To save her life. That last line stung. To save her life. As though it were a fact, undisputed truth. Jake could save Melanie, and he was choosing not to. An hour later, my dad joined in. "Jake, your mother is sick over this. Sick. She can't eat, can't sleep. Melanie's life is on the line, and you're acting like you don't care. We raised you better than this." I couldn't help but scoff. They'd raised me better? No. They'd raised me to be the family doormat. My silence had been their favorite tool for years, but I wasn't keeping quiet this time. I texted back. "Melanie got herself into this mess. I didn't. I'm not your ATM." Less than a minute later, Dad replied, "You think you're better than us now? Because you've got a good job? Remember where you came from, Jake. Family helps family. You should be ashamed of yourself." By nightfall, Melanie herself decided to join in. Unlike Mom and Dad, she skipped the niceties and went straight for the jugular. "You're rich, Jake. Don't pretend you're not. $85K is nothing to you. Nothing. Why are you being such an asshole about this?" I was floored. Rich? She thought I was rich? Sure, I'd worked hard to get where I was. I had a stable job, a modest apartment, and some savings, but I wasn't rolling in cash. And even if I were, why would I give a dime to someone like her? She didn't stop there. "You're selfish. That's what this is about. You've always been jealous of me, and now you see a chance to punish me. You're pathetic." I didn't reply. She didn't deserve one. But the texts kept coming, relentless. "How can you live with yourself, Jake? You're going to regret this when something happens to her. I hope you sleep well knowing you're letting your little sister suffer." Sleep well? I wasn't sleeping at all. My phone buzzed every few minutes, each message another slap across the face. I put it on silent and shoved it in a drawer, but that didn't stop my mind from replaying every single word. The next day, things escalated. I went to grab lunch from the cafe near my office, trying to clear my head, when my card was declined. Confused, I tried again. Same result. I pulled out my phone to check my bank account, and my stomach dropped. A large withdrawal had been flagged, $20,000. Except, I hadn't withdrawn anything. Heart racing, I called my bank. After navigating through endless automated prompts, I finally got through to someone named Amanda. "Sir, it looks like someone attempted to withdraw $20,000 from your account yesterday," she explained. "The transaction was flagged due to suspicious documentation. We froze your account temporarily." My hands were shaking. Suspicious documentation? What does that mean? "There was an attempt to use identification that didn't match the account holder's exact details," she said. "It's being investigated now, but you'll need to verify your identity in person to unfreeze the account. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Can you tell me where this happened? Was it local? Yes, sir. The withdrawal attempt was made at a branch downtown. I knew. I knew who it was before she even said it. Thank you. I muttered and hung up. I sat in my car outside the bank, my mind spinning. Someone, Melanie, my parents, had tried to steal from me. That wasn't just manipulation or guilt tripping. That was a crime. I thought back to Melanie's texts, the ones calling me rich, her bitterness, her entitlement. It made me sick. I couldn't prove it was her yet, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. Later that night, my phone rang. It was Melanie. I didn't want to pick up, but I did. I didn't do it, she said immediately, her voice frantic. My blood ran cold. Didn't do what, Melanie? I didn't try to take your money. Mom said you think I did, but I swear I didn't. You have to believe me. Funny, I said. I never told Mom that someone tried to take my money. How'd she know? Silence. Melanie? I said sharply. She took a shaky breath. Mom said, she guessed. She just guessed, Jake. You're lying, I said flatly. And you're terrible at it. I swear, she shouted. I didn't do it. Then who did? I snapped. She didn't answer. That night, I couldn't keep it together. I paced my apartment, replaying the events over and over. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My sister might have tried to steal from me, but I can't prove it? At midnight, I finally stopped pacing long enough to sit on the edge of my bed. My phone buzzed, another message from Dad. Your sister told us about the bank. What's wrong with you? She said you're accusing her of stealing. This is disgusting. You're not family anymore. I stared at the screen. Not family anymore. It was like the floor fell out from under me. For years, I'd been walking this tightrope, being their scapegoat, their fixer, the one who kept quiet while they praised Melanie. And now, because I said no, I wasn't family anymore. I dropped my phone onto the bed and buried my face in my hands. The next morning, I went to the bank to finalize the investigation. The manager, a stone-faced woman in her 40s named Karen, showed me the fake documents. They used a photocopy of a driver's license, she explained, sliding it across the table. I stared at the image. My name was on it, but the photo wasn't mine. The face looked familiar, though. Too familiar. It was a guy named Ryan Baxter, Melanie's on-again, off-again boyfriend. I felt a wave of nausea. I didn't even wait for the weekend. The moment I had confirmation that Melanie's boyfriend Ryan had been involved in the attempted theft from my bank account, I took the rest of the day off work. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn anyone. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles white, and drove straight to my parents' house. Because, of course, Melanie still lived there. The rage simmered inside me, hot and suffocating. I was done with their games. Done with being manipulated, lied to, and treated like a bank that never closed. This time, I needed answers. The drive was a blur. By the time I pulled into their driveway, the sun was low in the sky. The house hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same peeling paint, same plastic lawn chairs sitting empty on the porch. The sight of it made my stomach twist. I climbed the stairs and knocked. No, not knocked, pounded. It took a full minute before the door cracked open. Melanie stood there in sweatpants and a hoodie, her hair pulled into a messy bun. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Oh," she said. "What are you doing here? Where's Mom and Dad?" I asked, ignoring her question. "They went out. Dinner or something," she muttered, then crossed her arms. "Why?" I pushed past her and stepped into the house without waiting for an invitation. The smell hit me immediately, like a mix of stale coffee, old carpet, and leftover takeout. The place felt even smaller than I remembered. "Jake, what the hell? You can't just barge in here," Melanie snapped, turning to face me. I spun on her. "Sit down." "What?" "Sit down." My voice came out low and dangerous, like a growl. For once, Melanie seemed caught off guard. She dropped onto the edge of the worn-out couch, her arms still crossed like a shield. I stayed standing, towering over her. "You know why I'm here," I said coldly. "The bank. The stolen money." Her eyes darted to the side for half a second. Guilt. I caught it, and my anger surged. I didn't take your money, she said quickly, her voice too high-pitched to be convincing. No? Then maybe you can explain how Ryan Baxter, your loser boyfriend, was the one who tried to withdraw 20 grand from my account. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Don't bother lying, I spat. The bank showed me the ID he used. He didn't even bother using a fake name, just a photocopy of my name with his photo pasted on it. How stupid do you think I am, Melanie? She swallowed hard, her face pale. Then she tried to play innocent. I didn't know he was going to do that. I barked a laugh. Bullshit. I didn't. She insisted, her voice rising. Ryan did it on his own. I had nothing to do with it. I took a step closer. So, what, you're telling me Ryan, all on his own, just decided to target me? Out of the blue? Somehow, he knew my full name, bank branch, and enough details to pull this off. Her lip trembled. He must have heard me talking to Mom and Dad about you. I don't know, Jake. Stop blaming me. And there it was. The mention of my parents. My blood ran cold. Talking to Mom and Dad. I repeated slowly. About me. What exactly did you say to them, Melanie? She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at her hands. Answer me. I shouted. She flinched, then snapped. Fine. Yes. Okay. Mom and Dad put me up to it. The room went silent. I stared at her, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. What did you just say? She looked up at me defiantly, as if she was somehow the victim here. Mom and Dad thought you'd cave under pressure. They said you'd break if you thought I was in danger. They wanted me to convince Ryan to try something. I felt sick. Are you telling me that our parents asked you to steal from me? She shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. Not steal, just scare you into helping. You're rich, Jake. You can afford it. My hands curled into fists at my sides. What makes you think I'm rich, Melanie? Who fed you that bullshit? Mom, she said flatly. She told me you have a big savings account. A cushion, she called it. She said it's selfish of you not to share with family when we need it. Selfish? I repeated, my voice shaking. You think I'm selfish? I worked my ass off for everything I have. While you were sitting here doing nothing, I was pulling 12-hour shifts in college to pay my rent. And now you think you can just take it from me? She stood up suddenly, fire flashing in her eyes. Oh, don't act so high and mighty, Jake. You think you're better than the rest of us just because you got lucky? Because you had a job and saved money? You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for Mom and Dad. I stared at her, stunned. What the hell are you talking about? She smirked, crossing her arms again. Mom and Dad raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. If it weren't for them, you'd be nothing. You owe them everything you have. My vision blurred red. I took a deep breath, trying to control myself. They didn't raise me, Melanie. They used me. They spent my entire childhood treating me like a free babysitter, housekeeper, and scapegoat while they spoiled you. And now, they've convinced you that I owe them? They do deserve it, she snapped. You abandoned them, Jake. You act like you're so much better than this family. I am better. I cut her off sharply. Better than this house. Better than these lies. Better than you. Her jaw dropped, and for the first time, I saw something real in her face. Shock, maybe even hurt. But I didn't care. I grabbed my keys from the table. Where are you going? She demanded. I turned back to face her, my voice cold and clear. I'm done. Melanie. Done with you? Done with Mom and Dad. Done with all of it. You want to lie, cheat, and manipulate your way through life? Fine. But I'm not going to be part of it. You can't just walk away, she shouted after me. I turned back one last time. Watch me. I drove home in silence, my hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. My own parents had orchestrated this entire mess, convincing Melanie to get her low-life boyfriend involved. They'd used her and tried to steal from me. I felt betrayed, but more than that, I felt free. For years, I'd carried this family on my back. I'd been the responsible one, the good son, the fixer. I'd done everything they ever asked, and it was never enough. Now, for the first time, I was letting go. When I got back to my apartment, I blocked all of their numbers, Mom, Dad, Melanie. I shut them out completely. No calls, no texts, no guilt tripping. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no buzzing phone, no angry texts, no demands for money or guilt-laden pleas. Just silence. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking my coffee, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt at peace. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. It had been 4 days since I blocked my parents and Melanie. 4 days of silence, no buzzing phone, no manipulation, no lies. It felt surreal, like a calm I hadn't earned but desperately needed. I'd spent the time focused on work, working out, and staring at the wall trying to untangle decades of resentment. Then came the knock. It was loud and unrelenting. 3 sharp pounds on my apartment door, followed by silence, then 3 more. My stomach dropped. I had a bad feeling I knew who it was, and I wasn't in the mood to deal with it. I pulled myself off the couch, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. My heart sank. Mom and Dad. Dad stood rigid with his arms crossed over his chest like a human bulldozer. Mom, clutching her oversized purse, paced nervously. I opened the door halfway, my voice as flat as I could make it. "What are you doing here, Jake?" Mom started with that overly soft, trembling tone she always used when she wanted something. "We need to talk." No, I didn't bother hiding my irritation. I said everything I needed to say when I blocked your numbers. "Go home." Dad pushed the door open wider, ignoring my resistance, and barged in. "We're not doing this, Jake." "Unbelievable," I muttered as Mom followed him inside like a shadow. The tension in the room thickened as they stood in my living room. Mom wringing her hands, Dad glaring at me with that disapproving look I'd grown up with. "You've ignored us for days," Mom said. "We had no choice but to come." "You had a choice," I replied, my voice sharp. "You could have respected my boundaries. But I forgot. You don't respect me at all." "Don't start, Jake," Dad said, his voice low and gruff. "This isn't about you. This is about Melanie." "Of course it is," I scoffed, crossing my arms. "What a surprise." Mom launched into her speech. "Jake, your sister is in real trouble. These people she owes money to, they're dangerous. You don't understand the situation." "I understand just fine," I shot back. "She's a grown adult who made a mess, and now you want me to clean it up again? You're being cruel," Mom accused, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "She's your sister, Jake. Your only sister. Family takes care of each other." "No, Mom. That's a lie you've been feeding me since I was a kid. You don't care about family. You care about Melanie, and you only come to me when you need money or a favor. Don't stand there and act like we're some tight-knit, loving family. We aren't." Dad stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Watch your tone, Jake. Your mother's been worried sick. About Melanie. Always Melanie." I turned to face them both. "Meanwhile, where were you when I was working 2 jobs to keep myself fed in college? Where were you when I was struggling to pay rent? Oh, that's right. You were buying Melanie a car for her sweet 16? That's enough." Dad barked. His voice echoed off the walls, but I didn't flinch. "Not anymore." "No," I said firmly. "You're going to hear this. I have been paying my own way since I was 18. My rent, my tuition, my food, my life. I did it on my own while you coddled Melanie. She hasn't lifted a finger to take care of herself in her entire life because you never made her. And now you want me to give her 85 grand? Are you out of your minds?" "Jake, we helped you when you were younger." Mom cut in desperately. "Helped me?" I laughed bitterly. "What help? You mean the roof over my head and the food you begrudgingly fed me while treating me like your live-in servant? You don't get to take credit for the bare minimum." Mom looked stunned, as though she hadn't expected me to fight back. Dad, however, was just getting angrier. "You're so arrogant," he said through gritted teeth. "Walking around like you're better than us just because you made some money. Well, let me tell you something. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. We raised you." "You didn't raise me," I shot back. "You used me." "There's a difference." Mom started crying, loud, theatrical sobs that I'd seen too many times to take seriously. She dropped onto my couch, clutching her purse as if it were a lifeline. "Jake, please," she wept. "We're family. Melanie is in danger. If you let this happen to her, how will you live with yourself? How will you live with yourselves? I countered, my voice shaking with anger. You're the ones who put her up to stealing from me. You knew she and Ryan tried to take 20 grand out of my account, didn't you? Mom looked away, saying nothing. Dad's silence was even louder. That's what I thought, I said. You're both disgusting. Do you know that? You didn't just ruin Melanie, you're trying to ruin me too. For what? Because I said no? Because I finally put my foot down? She's your sister, Dad said stubbornly, as if that justified everything. And I'm your son, I snapped. But you don't care about that, do you? You only care about her. You've always cared more about her. Dad's face turned red. Fine, he said, his voice low and dangerous. If you're going to turn your back on this family, then you're not part of it anymore. What the hell does that mean? I asked, though I already had an idea. It means you'll be written out of the will, he said coldly. We won't leave you a dime. Everything will go to Melanie. I stared at him, stunned. You think I care about your inheritance? My voice came out in a shaky laugh. I don't need your money. I never have. I don't want a damn cent of it. Don't be stupid, Jake, Mom said, wiping her fake tears. That money could help you one day. You're being irrational. Irrational? I repeated, shaking my head. No, what's irrational is you showing up here, demanding money, threatening me, and acting like I'm the problem. I'm done with this. With you. With Melanie. All of it. Jake. No. I cut her off. Get out. Mom looked at me as though I'd slapped her. Dad, however, didn't move. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, I replied. But not as much as I'd regret letting you manipulate me for the rest of my life. For the first time, Dad looked unsure of himself. He grabbed Mom's arm, pulling her to her feet. She glanced back at me one last time, her expression a mix of sadness and anger, but I didn't care anymore. Goodbye, I said firmly as they walked out the door. The moment the door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, exhaling sharply. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but for the first time in years, I felt free. I'd said no. I'd stood my ground. I'd told them the truth, every ugly piece of it, and they couldn't handle it. Let them disown me. Let them give everything to Melanie. I didn't care. I'd built my life on my own, without their help, and I'd keep living it on my own. I blocked their numbers again, knowing this time it was permanent. I wasn't their fixer anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was free. 2 weeks after my parents stormed out of my apartment, I started to believe the dust had finally settled. I hadn't heard from them, hadn't seen any of their manipulative messages, and hadn't been ambushed by surprise visitors. I'd cut them out completely, blocked numbers, deleted social media profiles, and set email filters to send their nonsense straight to spam. For the first time in decades, I thought I'd won. Then I got the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed in a thick, official-looking envelope. When I saw the return address, Barrett and Gray Law Firm, my stomach dropped. I tore it open, my pulse pounding in my ears as I unfolded the crisp paper inside. Dear Mr. Jake Parker, this letter serves as a formal request to fulfill your moral and familial obligation to financially assist your sister, Melanie Parker, in light of her current hardship. Failure to comply may result in further legal action. Sincerely, Robert Barrett, ESQ. I sat down at my kitchen table, stunned. For a moment, I thought I was seeing things. Legal action? Moral obligation? Was this some kind of sick joke? I read it again, slower this time. My parents had actually hired a lawyer, paid someone, to send me a formal letter demanding I help Melanie. It was absurd. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my lawyer, Dan Henderson. Dan was a family friend who'd handled some work-related contracts for me in the past. Reliable, straight-shooting, and always calm under pressure. Dan, I said as soon as he picked up, I just got a letter from a lawyer about a moral obligation to give money to my sister. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end before Dan spoke. Did you say moral obligation? Yeah. Apparently, if I don't help Melanie financially, they're threatening further legal action. Dan chuckled. Jake, I'll be honest with you, that's not a thing. Moral obligation isn't enforceable under any law. They're bluffing. Are you sure? I asked, still rattled. Positive, Dan said. It's a scare tactic. They probably think you'll panic and write them a check. Don't. There's no court in the country that would entertain this nonsense. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger. They'd stooped to this level, hiring a lawyer to pressure me into submission. I clenched the letter in my hand. What do I do? I asked. I'll draft a cease and desist letter, Dan replied. We'll send it to their lawyer. That'll shut this down. And Jake, block them. On everything. Phones, social media, email. If they contact you through a third party, let me know. I'll handle it. Thanks, Dan, I said, exhaling slowly. Don't worry about this, he added. They're throwing tantrums and using legal stationery to do it. It's pathetic. He wasn't wrong. That evening, I followed Dan's advice to the letter. I blocked my parents' numbers again, deleted my emails from their lawyer, and removed every last trace of them from my life. Then I sat down and thought about what had just happened. My parents had crossed every line imaginable. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was harassment. They'd weaponized a lawyer to come after me, their own son, because I refused to clean up Melanie's mess. I was furious, but beneath the anger was a quiet sense of finality. This was the last straw. They'd proven, once and for all, that they didn't care about me. They cared about control. I wouldn't give them that anymore. 2 days later, Dan called to update me. They've received the cease and desist letter, he said. I got confirmation from their lawyer. They won't contact you again unless they want to risk a harassment claim. And what about Melanie? I asked. Can't speak for her, Dan replied. But if she tries anything, let me know. I'll make sure she doesn't get far. Thanks, Dan. No problem, Jake. You're doing the right thing. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. 6 months later, I barely recognized my life. The quiet that followed cutting off my family had felt strange at first. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to show up at work or send another letter. But it never happened. They'd finally given up, and without their constant weight on my shoulders, I started to feel lighter, better. Work took off in ways I hadn't expected. 3 months after the final confrontation, I was called into my boss's office. My company had been going through a restructuring phase, and I'd been busting my ass on multiple projects, trying to stay ahead of the chaos. Jake, my boss said, leaning back in his chair, I've been watching your work these past few months. You've been a machine. You've taken on extra projects, your clients love you, and your team has never been more efficient. I blinked, caught off guard. Thank you, sir. We want to reward that, he said with a smile. How does senior project manager sound? For a moment, I just stared at him. Senior project manager? That was a promotion I'd been quietly hoping for but hadn't dared expect. It sounds great, I said, unable to stop myself from smiling. The raise that came with it was significant, enough that I no longer worried about unexpected expenses or rainy days. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had called me rich when I wasn't. Now, without them in my life, I was thriving.